So we're really pleased to have our next speaker here. We've got Iain Stewart, who's Professor of Geoscience Communications at the University of Plymouth. He's just going to speak a little about why aiming for that idea of net zero is important for Devon and that vision of what, a net zero future might be like. Over to you, Iain.
Thanks, Kayla. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight, and I say that as someone who I think knows something about what you're about to go through over these next few weeks. So I'm, as Kayla said, I'm at the University of Plymouth in geoscience there, and I'm president of the Devon Wildlife Trust, but I'm obviously not Devonian by my voice. And my background is someone who really is interested in the planet, how it works, what it means for us, and have made lots of programs about climate change and indeed the science of climate change and how complex and sprawling that is. And in those programs, it's very clear that climate change is a real and important issue, and one that can be overwhelming. The scale of the planetary effects, the climatic and ecological crisis that we're in is very real. And although we don't maybe see too much of it on our shores here, other parts of the planet, it's starting to bite. And I think what that means is, when you start to encounter that, and some of you will know this, and some of you are aware of it, some of you may think it's a load of tosh and complete rubbish, but over the next, days and weeks, or the sessions really, you're going to hear a lot more about it. And it's easy for it to be very overwhelming and scary. And that's because what we're about to go into over the next generation, by generation, I mean, we normally judge generations 25 years. Over the next 25 years, we are going to need to transform our society and our planet. And it's easy to think of that, we can see it at the international scale, we can see it at the national scale, but the harder thing is to think about how is it going to transform at the local scale, at the scale of Devon. So I've just, come off the back of the Scottish Climate Assembly, a whole nation looking at what its future can be. And actually, although it's, bigger and more complicated and things like that, a lot of the same issues. How do we use our mobility better, transport systems? How do we do that? How do we transition our industries from fossil fuel, heavy industries into the industries we need for the future? And how do we change our lifestyles? And all of this really important. And so, having a Devon perspective on this is kind of critical. So I just thought I'd pull out a few things. So this push to net zero, this requirement for us to start to balance out, whatever we put into the atmosphere to be taken out, it's got some real critical importance in this region. And I use the region broadly because Devon is part of the Southwest, and in a way it's the offer of the Southwest that we're talking about, the kind of characteristics that we have here that make it important for us to have a voice on how this works. So a few general points. First of all, I mean, there's 10 times more kind of marine extent to Devon and indeed to Cornwall than there is land extent. So the big effects that's going to be happening in our seas and our oceans, and indeed the resources that are there, that's an important bit. The stuff that's happening on land in terms of the places like Dartmoor, etc. Its ability is this big carbon sink to take in some of the carbon. Make no doubt about it, this region is going to be really critical in the UK basically transforming itself. But also there's massive opportunities for this region. So I think it's easy to paint the picture of climate change as this doom and gloom, and it's, I've done it myself, but there's also huge potential for change here. If you think about what Devon is, I travel a lot. I used to travel a lot more before COVID, but I still travel a lot. And if you say Devon to people, know this. They say, "Oh, Devon, lovely. What a lovely part of the world you live in. The countryside, the beaches." So there's this picture of a backwater, a quiet rural idyll, if you like. But actually, this is a place which is the potential hub of a complete energy transformation, a clean growth agenda. So we are the natural powerhouse down there. You have the Northern powerhouse, you have the Midlands engine, all of it built around industrial economic growth. We're obviously not like that. We're a different kind of place. We're largely rural, but with these little metropolitan areas, distributed population, dependent on tourism. We know what we are. But there's tremendous opportunities. So offshore, again, almost certainly offshore wind and floating wind. It's not been developed yet. The North Sea is packed. The big energy bonus is going to be in the Western approaches and developing that. Now that is going to be offshore, out of sight, perhaps out of mind, but it's going to require a new infrastructure, a new energy kind of supply chains and all of this to be happening in the Southwest. And that's one of the things that often we lack in this region is decent, well-paying jobs for our economy. We rely on seasonal kind of tourism, etc. But this idea of the offshore wind is really important. And it will restart a long-standing question, which is onshore wind, which is very contentious. But there is something, I think, in our area as well about local energy. The sense that the energy we generate here is the energy we use. Because we're going to have to use, personally, a lot less energy. But the energy demands of the country as we move to electrification, as we move to electric vehicles, etc., is going to be much larger. So the energy demands are going up and we're going to have to produce more energy, and more of that energy, or less and less of that energy, will have to come from fossil fuels, traditional ways. So these are huge, almost at some level existential questions, big moral, ethical questions that we have to talk about. But it's also things about how we're going to get through in terms of our local resources, etc. And there's tremendous resources down here in terms of, again, the energy transition and moving ahead. But the kind of key questions that you're going to be asked about, which are these difficult questions, are going to be around, how we get away from moving from our cars into much more efficient public transport, the interconnectivity, how we connect our rural areas to our cities and allow people to move around. Because this has got to be, the net zero transition has got to be effective. It's got to do what it needs to do for the climate. But it's got to be fair. It's actually got to be fair in all these different groups that are here. And that is really, really difficult. So, I think what you're going to see over the next few weeks is, as the sessions develop, is you starting to grapple with these complex issues. It's very easy to not want to think about climate change, because it's quite hard, but actually it's got so many different dimensions to it. You're going to hear about the economics, the social aspects, cultural aspects, and also the scientific aspects. But I think the thing that I would hold on to is, what kind of future do you want Devon to have? What kind of future do you want to have in terms of you, your kids, your grandkids, whatever? Because that's what we're being asked about to do here. We're, through the assembly, trying to give courage to our political decision makers for them to push further, for them to push government further. But all of it rests on us deciding what the vision we want for our country to be, and in this case, our county to be within that country. So these are big issues. These are going to be complicated issues, and you're going to have arguments and disagreements. And great, we live in a world of fast food politics, and this is going to be slow cooked stuff. And I recommend it to you, and I think you should thoroughly enjoy it. So good luck.